Steam locomotives are a very important part of our country's history, as they helped speed the industrial expansion and growth of our nation. Nowadays, steam locomotives have been retired in favor of more economical diesels, but many have found a new lease on life, serving as public relation tools and educating young and old alike about the magic of steam. However, many locomotives that did operate after their revenue careers have been forced back into retirement and have seemed to become forgotten due to the more fortunate ones. So from Canadian National 10-wheelers to Union Pacific shop switchers, it is with my great honor to present these 10 retired steam stars that deserve more respect. Starting off this list, we've got Canadian National 10-wheeler 1551. Built back in April of 1912 by the Montreal Locomotive Works for the Canadian Northern Railway as engine 1534, this classy 10-wheeler would be used on both passenger and freight service. In 1923, when the railroads of Canada would be unified, the 1534 would be relettered as Canadian National 1534. In 1956, the locomotive would be renumbered to 1551, and in 1958, she would finally be retired from the Canadian National, and purchased by none other than F. Nelson Blount for his Steamtown collection. She would remain in the hands of Steamtown until Jerry Joe Jacobson would acquire the stout 10-wheeler in a trade for ex-Baldwin Locomotive Works No. 26. In 1988, the 1551 would steam after more than 3 decades of silence and would re-emerge into her new life as Ohio Central 1551. The locomotive would run many trips on Jerry's Ohio Central up until 2003, when she was removed from service in need of extensive repairs. Today, the 1551 sits inside the Age of Steam roundhouse. Now, while the AOS does have eventual plans to return the locomotive to steam, it will be a long time from now before any work is done on the engine that started it all. Moving onwards, we have Reeder Railroad No. 11. Now, this locomotive is a special case as I wasn't able to find much on this, so there may be a lack of information. This Prairie 262 was built in October of 1925 for the Caddo and Choctaw Railroad for general service. In 1943, the locomotive will be sold to the Reeder Railroad of Arkansas. In the late 1960s, the railroad reassigned the locomotive for tourist operations. In the mid-1980s, the locomotive would travel to the Hartwell Railroad of Georgia, and in 1987, it will be donated to the Kentucky Central chapter of the NRHS, and would continue to haul trips up until 1993, as the railroad that ran 11's trips was taken over by CSX. As of today, 11 currently sits on stack display in the town of Nicholasville, Kentucky. Moving onwards from the forgotten No. 11, we have Philadelphia and Reading 1187. Built in March of 1903 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works, this Mother Hubbard-style camelback was used for light yard work on the Reading Railroad up until 1946, when she would be retired and sold off to the E&G Brook Iron Company for switching duties. During her time at E&G, 1187 would be renumbered as engine No. 4. After E&G, she would be sold once more to the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company, where she would remain until being purchased by the newly rearranged Strasburg Railroad Company for tourist operation. 1187 re-entered service on July 4, 1963 as Strasburg Railroad Company No. 4. Shortly afterwards, 1187 started developing problems and complaints from crews. After only 6 weeks of operation, she was repurposed for yard duties, arranging trains up until May of 1967, when her fire was put out for good. Now wearing her original P&R livery, 1187 sits in Strasburg's main yard. Though she will never run again, the railroad does have a long-term goal to perform a cosmetic rebuild on the engine. However, with plenty of other projects, it will be a while before any work is done to the last camelback in operation. Keeping in line with the spirit of switchers, next up on this list we have Union Pacific 4466. Originally built in October of 1920 for the Union Pacific Railroad, the 4466 would end up spending most of her career in Cheyenne, Wyoming as a shop switcher. After Cheyenne, the 4466 was transferred to Grand Island, Nebraska in 1960, where she would serve out her final days with the UP until being retired from service in 1962. Number 4466 would remain in Grand Island in storage up until 1973, when it would be donated to the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society. In 1978, the 4466 would then be donated to the California State Railroad Museum, and in 1984, after several years on display, the 4466 was restored to operation to pull the museum trips. In 1986, the 4466 ventured to Vancouver, British Columbia to take part in Steam Expo 86 with engines such as Canadian Pacific 1201, 2860, and many other operational locomotives. In 1999, new California emission regulations banned the operation of coal-fired steam locomotives, which caused the 4466 to be put on indefinite static display. Today, the 4466 still sits on static display inside the California State Railroad Museum, being well taken care of by volunteers for many years to come. And now we get to the oldest locomotive on this list, as well as one of my personal favorites, Clinchfield Railroad No. 1. Originally built in 1882 for the Columbus, Chicago, and Indiana Central Railway, engine number 1 was originally numbered as number 423 and was mainly used for freight traffic. After being retired by the CCNI, 423 was sold to the Ohio River and Charleston Railroad and began a new life hauling logs and coal loads in the Tennessee and Carolinas region. In 1913, while on lease to the Black Mountain Railroad, she would earn the nickname Number 1. In 1955, the Number 1 was sold back to its original company, now known as the Clinchfield Railroad, who would then in turn sell her off to the city of Irwin, Tennessee, for static display in a downtown park. She would remain here until 1968, when she was bought back once more by the Clinchfield Railroad for fan trips. After operating many trips over the CCNI, the Seaboard system would shut down the Clinchfield steam program after discovering that the Clinchfield's president has smuggled money in an effort to restore Chesapeake and Ohio 2716. In 1979, she would be donated to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum, and in 1982, she would be brought out of retirement to pull short 1-mile round trips on the museum grounds up until she was put back into retirement in 1985. Today, the Clinchfield No. 1 sits on static display inside the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad Museum, with hopes of steaming again seeming very unlikely. For this next locomotive, I can already hear Boston, Ohio filming over it. Well, moving onwards, we've got Southern Railway 385. This charming consolidation was built as part of the Southern Railway's H4 Class 280 locomotives in November of 1907 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works for hauling mainline and branch line freight on the Southern Railway. She would serve the Southern honorably up until her retirement in 1952, and soon afterwards she would be sold to the Virginia Blue Ridge Railway in November of the same year. After being retired in 1959, the 385 would be saved from scrap by Earl H. Gill of the Morris County Central Railroad, located in Morristown, New Jersey, and on May 9, 1965, she would officially start her new life as an Excursion engine. On April 12, 1969, the locomotive would be present at the 100th anniversary of the town of Summit, New Jersey, in a cooperation effort with the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad. The 385 would continue to operate on the Morris County Central up until October of 1978, when major repairs that the line couldn't afford forced the engine into retirement once more. In the late 1990s, the 385 would be put in danger of scrap due to a failed school engineering program that she was donated to. She was saved within hours of scrapping, and in 2008 was moved to the Whippany Railway Museum, where she still resides to this day. Though it is very unlikely that the 385 will ever run again, the locomotive has undergone a very thorough cosmetic rebuild, and not to mention, sister locomotive, Southern 401, still operates to this day at the Monticello Railway Museum. However, it is safe to say that the old 385 is getting a well-deserved retirement. Next up, we have Southern Pacific T31-2353. This beautiful product of the Baldwin Locomotive Works was built back in August of 1912 for the Southern Pacific Railroad for both passenger and freight service. In January 1957, the locomotive would be retired from the SP's roster and donated to the fairgrounds located in Imperial, California. She would remain on display up until 1984, when she would be donated once again to the Pacific Southwest Railway Museum and arrive on site in 1986. Shortly thereafter, the 2353 would be restored by volunteers and returned to service on March 2, 1996. The locomotive would haul many trips for the museum up until 2001, when it was discovered that the engine was in need of extensive boiler work. As of today, the 2353 sits on stack display, undergoing a cosmetic restoration.